Night of the Twisters, next chapter, later on. I guess Mom expected some other volunteers to rush right off to Mrs. Smiley's with us, but that wasn't the way things worked out. The civilians, as a civil defense man called them, were needed elsewhere. We didn't wait to find out where, we just took off running. What we saw when we got to Smiley's place was really incredible. Her big old cottonwoods were still in leaf. Beyond the trees, her white frame house loomed in front of us, same as always, only now it was topless. Amazingly, the walls were still standing 4 square. The front porch jutted out like the chin of a stubborn old-timer who simply refused to budge. Quickly, we were up on the porch, moving aside the limbs and trash that had blown onto it, all of us exclaiming over Belle Smiley's good luck. She was right about her new storm door, only a couple of dents, Arthur said. We didn't waste any time getting to the kitchen where the basement stairs were. Sure enough, the steps had collapsed under the weight of the back porch, part of which seemed to have slid in sideways, landing in a mound of rubble below. "Mrs. Smiley," we called first, taking turns listening. "Smiley, can you hear us?" Our only answer was the moaning of wind as it tore through the broken windows and rattled house. If she was down there, she didn't hear us or couldn't answer, one or the other. Our next problem was getting below to find her. After dismissing a few harebrained ideas of mine, Arthur came up with a plan. Stacy thought it sounded too dangerous, but we talked her into trying it by saying we'd go first. Arthur had read about a rescue operation in the Arctic where an Eskimo had used an upended dog sled. I couldn't quite picture what he had in mind, but Stacy and I went on to work doing what he told us to. Grunting, cussing as needed, the 3 of us lowered Smiley's heavy kitchen table, legs up, through the stair opening until it came to rest on something solid. I was the first one to drop down on it, with Stacy training the light on me from above. I crept down the slippery slide slope of the table until I could grab a support post. It was easy to swing from there down to the basement floor. Arthur made the same trip. Under his weight, however, the table slipped and the whole thing came crashing onto the cement, barely missing me. He wasn't hurt, but that ended it for Stacy. With all the noise we were making and still no response from Mrs. Smiley, I decided she had either died of a heart attack or had turned her hearing aid to 0. Then Stacy lowered her light to us by tying it to the string of a smelly old mop she found somewhere. My flashlight had grown so faint we left it upstairs. Slowly at first, Arthur shone the light all around us. There wasn't any sign of Smiley. He lightened up her old-fashioned furnace, which was spooky as anything there in the dark, with its arms reaching out in all directions. Arthur and I stepped around it, but all we could smell was a musty basement. He next shone the light across Smiley's gleaming rows of canned fruit and tomatoes onto pieces of old furniture she had stored everywhere. There wasn't a whole lot of room for walking, but we started out. "Mrs. Smiley!" I bellowed several times. Arthur shot the light around and behind everything along the narrow little passageways we came to. It gave me the creeps thinking we could stumble over her body without even seeing it. I couldn't decide which would be worse, stumbling over it or actually seeing it. I guess Arthur was thinking along the same lines. "Wouldn't this make a terrific spook alley?" he whispered, turning around. A few seconds later, I heard a really weird sound. Arthur put on his brakes so fast I bumped into him. "You hear that?" he said. I nodded. We stood there listening as it repeated itself twice more. "Did you find her?" Stacy called from above, making us both jump. "Shh," we said together. Arthur pointed with the light. "It's coming from over there, I think." "Will somebody answer me?" Stacy yelled louder. "In a minute," Arthur boomed right in my ear. I followed him around to an old dresser, past a spidery wooden high chair, then down an aisle of storage boxes, the white beam bouncing ahead of us in the direction of the noise. I caught my breath when we saw her. There she was, curled up on an old sofa with only her mouse nest hair sticking out above the blanket. She wasn't dead. She was asleep and snoring for all it was worth. Arthur grinned at me, and we started to laugh. We couldn't help it. How could anybody sleep through a tornado? She made another little series of snorts, dainty this time, as if she knew we were listening. Arthur bent double, grabbing his sides. We couldn't stop howling, either of us. Over the sounds of wind battering the house, Stacy heard us whooping it up and thought that we had flipped. "What is going on?" she kept yelling, but we were too weak to answer. A little later, it was almost as funny trying to get Mrs. Smiley out of this bloomin' cellar, as she put it. She was being an awfully good sport, but said she wasn't no mountain goat and to remember that. We couldn't get her to try the stair-step system that Arthur rigged up under a window with a chair and a stool, though he demonstrated it could be done with a little pull up there at the end. Pull up? Smiley snorted. I am 81 years old, boys. Don't you think I'm better off to stay down here? It's too dangerous, Arthur tried to explain. The police said everyone had to get out because there could be explosions or fires. Land's sakes, she muttered. Never thought I'd be chased off by a darn old cyclone. She kept running her hands in and out of her sweater pockets. I could tell she was plenty nervous. Stacy was outside the window by that time, removing broken glass from the sill with that same mop, giving us weather reports. Can you guys think of something? She said. The rain's let up for a minute. It'll be a lot easier if we can get Mrs. Smiley down to the bus before it starts again. Suddenly, Smiley brightened. How about if we call the fire department? They'd come out here for an old scaredy cat like me. I flashed light at Arthur, who was rolling his eyes. We couldn't get it through her head just how bad things were. If we fool around long enough, he said down low, the fire department will be here. Finally, though, I had an idea. We dragged the sofa that she'd been sleeping on to the window and tried angling a set of old-timey bed springs from the cushions to the wall. Arthur and I took turns testing it, changing the angle, trying it again here and there. It sagged a little under Arthur's weight, but it made pretty fair ladder for someone my size. Smiley watched, shining the light for us as we worked, predicting everything from broken bones to heart failure if she tried to climb that monkey fence herself. By the time we were ready to boost her up, Stacy had a blanket folded on the windowsill. We'll get you out, she kept encouraging Smiley. I'm really strong, huh, Arthur? We can't leave you here, you know. Anything could happen. Then, as if she just thought of it, hey, I could try it first. I will if you want me to. For a second, I forgot all about Smiley. Stacy looked so beautiful hanging over that windowsill, her hair whipping across her red and swollen cheek. I was beginning to think of her as a rescuing angel or something. Take her other arm, Dan, Stacy said in a sharp voice that brought me back to earth. It took a little more coaxing, but we finally got Smiley up on the sofa, grasping the coils in both hands and looking scared. Spider-Man, Arthur whispered before I punched him. Thank goodness for Stacy, who was hanging halfway in now, saying all the right things. I don't think Smiley would have tried it for Arthur and me alone. The two of us stood on the sofa below, Arthur on one side of me and me on the other, boosting her from behind as she started up. The situation suddenly struck Smiley as being very funny. I'm not going to believe I did this, she said in this giggly voice as she reached for another handheld. When I wake up, I just know I never ever did this. And then, push, she sang out, and we pushed. We also had to take turns getting her shoes and the next spring coil up. On she went, 6 inches at a time. Here comes Sir Edmund Hillary, she announced, better than halfway. Arthur and I just cracked up. Keep coming, you're almost here, cool Stacy said at the top. Once there, Smiley paused, teetering dangerously at the top as she tried to see out the window past Stacy. Oh, Lord, I hope the whole neighborhood isn't out there to see me kill myself. I'm the only one here, Stacy said, and you're doing great. Stacy had a good grip on Smiley's shoulders now. One more step ought to do it, Mrs. Smiley. Can you take one more step for me? It took all three of us, using the push-pull method, to get her through that little rectangular window. Tiny as she is, she claimed to have dropped 10 pounds during the process, but the only thing she lost that we could see was a button off her old gardening sweater. And my dignity, she said, later, improving the story each time she told it. After getting her out, Arthur and I easily scrambled up those coils and out the window. We had so much practice. By then, Stacy was shining the flashlight all around and under the trees, so Smiley could see how her neighborhood had been devastated. The house that once stood a hefty stone's throw from Smiley's simply didn't exist anymore. Oh my, she said and trembled. Oh my, oh my. Oh, I thought I was the only one. Her skirt flapped noisily against her skinny bowed legs. Nobody was laughing now. Mrs. Smiley hung on to Stacy's arm all the way to the Darlingtons. As we neared their place, we could see firemen searching the 2 and 3 rooms where walls had been left standing. In slickers and hard hats, they were easy to spot. Their lights crisscrossed in the dark, slicing eerily through holes in the bedroom hallway. We could hear their voices calling back and forth. Suddenly, Arthur came to life. Hey, that's our house! He grabbed the light from Stacy, went crashing across the yard, and he and one of the firemen talked for a minute. "All clear, move on," the fireman called to the others. He jumped to the ground beside Arthur, and they walked around that side of the street into the remains. There in the overlapping circles made by their lights, the sky sprayed a giant red X on the Darlington cement foundation. Then the two of them came out to the street where we waited, bunched together with our backs to the wind. "Y'all live around here?" he shouted. Smiley and I gave him our names and addresses. He wrote it all down on a pad that came out of his pocket. "Officer, please, how bad is it?" Mrs. Smiley asked. I could see his shoulders sag in the wash of our light. He hesitated, slapping his huge gloves against his leg as we closed in to hear better. "Ma'am, I wish I knew. Capitol Heights, Custer's Lake were both hit before we were. Another one touched down just north of here. Patrol cars coming in from Hastings say there's been a twister action around Phillips. That's all I know." I drew my breath. Not Phillips, not the farm. I was strangled by fear all over again. "You folks get out of here as fast as you can," he went on. "Power lines are down everywhere. Mainline gas has been shut off, but there's no way to guarantee everyone's safety if they stay in the area." With the next jab of lightning, he left us and returned to his crew. The sky grumbled all the way across the black sky as it sent up one of the more desperate prayers. Even above the storm, I could hear the racket my heart was making against my ribs. The look on Arthur's face told me he knew what was going on in my mind. His dad was safe at the armory. "Come on, Dan," he pulled me around. "Let's you and me hustle Smiley down to the bus. You can ask around, find out something, okay?" I wanted to run after that fireman to make him tell me more, but already Smiley was getting a good grip on my arm. "I'm sure lucky," she chortled into my ear, "to have such nice boys to escort me." With a 12-year-old escort on either side, she was practically swept off her feet. For sure, we hurried along faster than Stacy did, who had been taking the same mincy steps as Smiley. She might be 81, but she had survived with all her funny bones intact. Mom's big bus was gone, but people had started lining up for a minibus parked in the intersection. Some of the neighbors around us were hugging each other, some were crying. Little kids clung to their mother's hands or hung onto their legs. I recognized a girl from school, but we were both struck with shyness. One older guy we didn't know just stood there in the middle of the street looking bewildered. When Arthur flipped the light on him for a second, he didn't even blink. I think he was in a state of shock. A utility company truck pulled into the circle of the vehicles as we arrived. A cop who'd been sitting up flares walked over and talked to the driver. The whole scene seemed psychedelic and somehow unreal, as the flashing yellow and red lights turned raindrops into streaming colored beads. Even with so much distraction, I couldn't stop thinking about my dad and that tornado whirling towards Phillips. Who could I ask? Who would know if only someone had a radio going? Just then, several ladies came back to speak to Smiley. I couldn't believe it, but Ruth Pavelka from our church was actually making jokes about the bazaar the Presbyterians would have to cancel. Good old Ruth, soaking wet, her hair plastered to her head, she was trying to make everyone laugh. "I hated that quilt I was stitching from the very beginning," she told Smiley. "It just had the feel of bad luck. You know what I mean?" By the time we four got to the head of the line, the driver was closing the doors. "Sorry," he said. "I can't jam one more person in here." Smiley's expression dropped as we were forced to step back, but not long. An older kid in the front seat stood up and got off so she could have his place. And Ruth Pavelka cheered. I didn't know the kid, but he looked about 18, and his sweatshirt said, "It's hard to be humble when you're a cornhusker." The driver thanked him, then stepped down so he could help Smiley on. Suddenly, she was in no big hurry, but now that our seat was reserved. "I'd sure enough have perished if it hadn't been for you kids," she said, patting each of us in turn. "Come on by for some fresh baked cookies real soon, you hear?" I saw Arthur and Stacy grin at each other as something of Smiley's spirit passed between them. Even I felt better. "Soon," she said. "Come by soon." Then we were waving goodbye, and Smiley was waving at us through the window. The faint smell of cookies, so tantalizing seconds before, disappeared as quickly as it came. I was out on the farm with my dad. With Grandma and Grandpa, I was thinking of the farmhouse, which had been built during the Great Depression, without a basement. The storm cellar was a long way from the back porch, I remembered, and the doors were very hard to open. All All right, that is the end of that chapter. We'll start next. I hope you guys enjoy your day. Bye.